Edward Dingle trudged down the sidewalk, his feet shuffling in a monotonous rhythm that matched the dull beat of his heart. Another day, another dollar, another uninspired attempt at romance with his wife, Jane. He sighed, remembering the lukewarm reception to his latest gesture. A bouquet of carnations from the grocery store and a card that read, "You're neat." Jane had smiled politely, placed the flowers in a vase, and resumed her crossword puzzle. As he neared his office building, Edward caught sight of his reflection in a storefront window. His receding hairline seemed to have crept back another millimeter overnight, and his belly strained against the buttons of his shirt. He grimaced, thinking of the constant ribbing he endured from his coworkers about his lackluster love life. "Hey, Eddie," called out Bob from accounting as Edward entered the office. "What grand romantic gesture did you sweep Jane off her feet with last night? Let me guess. Microwave TV dinners and a riveting game of Scrabble?" Edward forced a weak chuckle. "Ha ha, Bob, you're a regular comedian." As he settled into his cubicle, Edward couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air seemed to crackle with an unfamiliar energy, and he could have sworn he heard a faint humming sound coming from outside. Little did Edward know that high above the city, a sleek silver spaceship hovered, its occupants peering down at the unsuspecting humans below. Inside the craft, two Venusians, Skila and Trilla, huddled around a control panel, their elongated fingers dancing across holographic displays. "Are you sure this is wise, Skila?" Trilla asked, her iridescent skin shimmering with concern. "Testing our sonic and libido transducer on an unsuspecting human seems unethical." Skila waved a dismissive tentacle. "Nonsense, Trilla. We're scientists. How else are we supposed to gather data on human mating rituals? Besides, look at that specimen down there." She pointed a slender appendage at Edward's balding head. "He's practically begging for our intervention." Trilla sighed, her multiple eyes blinking in resignation. "Very well. Initiating the Love Ray in 3, 2, 1. A beam of pulsating energy shot down from the spaceship, enveloping Edward in a soft pink glow. He shivered, feeling a strange tingling sensation course through his body. Shrugging it off as a caffeine jitter, he continued his walk to work. As Edward rounded the corner, he nearly collided with Susan from HR. She stumbled, dropping her stack of papers, and Edward bent to help her gather them up. "Oh, Edward," Susan breathed, her eyes wide and glassy. "I never noticed how rugged you look. Has anyone ever told you that your male pattern baldness is incredibly sexy?" Edward blinked in confusion. Thanks, Susan. Are you feeling okay?" Before Susan could respond, a group of women from the marketing department rounded the corner. Their eyes locked onto Edward, and they froze in their tracks. "Edward Dingle?" gasped Melissa, the head of social media. "Is that you? You look different, amazing, like a silver fox crossed with a teddy bear." The women began to advance on Edward, their eyes hungry and their hands outstretched. Edward backed away, his heart racing. "Ladies, please, I'm a married man. What's gotten into you all?" As he retreated, Edward bumped into Claire from accounting. She spun around, ready to berate whoever had jostled her, but her anger melted away the moment she saw Edward's face. "Eddie?" she purred, running a finger down his chest. "Have you been working out? You're positively glowing." Edward's mind reeled. What was happening? Had the entire female population of his office gone mad? He turned to flee, only to find himself face to face with Gladys, the 65-year-old receptionist. "Edward, you naughty boy," Gladys cooed, adjusting her thick glasses. "I've always had a thing for younger men. How about you and I go somewhere private and I'll show you why they call me Glad Hands Gladys." With a yelp of terror, Edward bolted for the exit, a horde of lovesick women hot on his heels. As he burst out onto the street, he realized the madness wasn't confined to his office. Every woman he passed turned to stare at him, their eyes glazing over with desire. "It's him!" shrieked a group of joggers, veering off their path to pursue Edward. "The man of my dreams!" cried an elderly woman, abandoning her walker to give chase. Edward ran as fast as his out-of-shape body would allow, dodging grabbing hands and declarations of undying love. He ducked into an alley, gasping for breath, and pulled out his phone to call the one person he thought might be able to help. "Jane?" he panted when his wife answered. "Something crazy is happening. All the women in town have gone mad. They're chasing me, saying they're in love with me. I don't know what to do." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Edward," Jane said slowly, "is this some kind of role-play thing? Because if it is, I have to say it's a bit more creative than your usual attempts at spicing things up." "No, Jane, I'm serious," Edward insisted. "I'm hiding in an alley off Main Street. Can you come get me?" Jane sighed. "All right, Edward, I'll play along. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Try not to let your crowd of adoring fans carry you off before I arrive." As Edward waited for his wife, he peered cautiously out of the alley. Women of all ages prowled the streets, calling his name and searching for any sign of him. He shrank back into the shadows, wondering if he was losing his mind. High above, Skila and Trilla watched the chaos unfold with a mixture of fascination and horror. "This isn't right," Trilla said, her tentacles twisting nervously. "The transducer was only supposed to affect one human at a time. We've disrupted the entire mating dynamic of this city." Skila's multiple eyes blinked rapidly as she analyzed the data streaming across their screens. "Fascinating! It seems the human male's pheromones have been amplified beyond our calculations. We must recalibrate the device immediately." As the Venusians worked to correct their mistake, Jane's car pulled up to the alley. Edward dashed out and dove into the passenger seat, slamming the door behind him. "Drive!" he yelled. "Quick, before they spot me." Jane raised an eyebrow but complied, pulling away from the curb just as a group of women rounded the corner, crying out in disappointment as they saw Edward escape. "Okay, Edward," Jane said as they drove. "I have to admit this is more exciting than your usual romantic gestures. But don't you think it's a bit over the top?" Edward slumped in his seat, his hair disheveled and his shirt torn. "Jane, I swear to you, I'm not making this up. Something bizarre is happening and I can't explain it." As they drove through town, Jane couldn't help but notice the unusual number of women out on the streets, all seeming to be searching for something, or someone. She glanced at her husband, taking in his rumpled appearance and the wild look in his eyes. "Edward," she said slowly, "I think I believe you. But how is this possible? What could have caused every woman in town to suddenly fall for you?" Before Edward could respond, a bright pink light enveloped their car. The vehicle sputtered and died, coming to a stop in the middle of the road. Edward and Jane looked up to see a massive silver spaceship hovering above them. "Oh, come on," Edward groaned. "Aliens? Really? As if this day couldn't get any weirder." A beam of light shot down from the ship, and two figures materialized on the street in front of them. Skila and Trilla approached the car, their tentacles waving apologetically. "Greetings, humans," Skila said, her voice a melodious trill. "We must offer our sincerest apologies for the inconvenience we have caused you today." Edward and Jane stared at the aliens, mouths agape. Finally, Edward found his voice. You're responsible for all this?" Trilla nodded, her iridescent skin shimmering with embarrassment. "I'm afraid so. We were conducting an experiment on human mating rituals, and our device malfunctioned." "Malfunctioned?" Edward sputtered. "I've been chased through town by a mob of love-crazed women. I nearly got mauled by Gladys from reception." Skila's tentacles twirled excitedly. "Yes, fascinating results. We've collected more data on human attraction in one day than in all our previous studies combined." Jane, who had been silent until now, cleared her throat. "Excuse me, but why Edward? Why did you choose my husband for your experiment?" The Venusians exchanged a look. "Well," Trilla explained, "we wanted to observe the effects on a, shall we say, average specimen. Someone who wouldn't normally attract such attention." Edward's face fell. "Gee, thanks. But fear not," Skila announced. "We've recalibrated our device and reversed the effects. All the women affected by the Loveray should be returning to normal as we speak." As if on cue, confused voices began to rise from the streets around them. Women who had been frantically searching for Edward moments ago now stood still, blinking in bewilderment. What just happened? Why am I out here? Does anyone else feel like they just woke up from a really weird dream about Edward from accounting? Edward and Jane watched as the women dispersed, shaking their heads and returning to their daily routines. The couple turned back to the aliens, who were preparing to depart. "Well, humans," Skila said, "we've learned a great deal from this experience. Perhaps next time we'll stick to observing from a distance." "Next time?" Edward and Jane exclaimed in unison. But before they could protest further, the aliens vanished in a shimmer of light. The spaceship above them hummed to life and shot off into the sky, leaving no trace of its existence save for the lingering confusion on the streets below. As Edward and Jane sat in their car trying to process the events of the day, they couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. "You know," Jane said, wiping tears of mirth from her eyes, "I have to admit, this beats carnations and a your neat card any day." Edward grinned, reaching over to take his wife's hand. "I guess I'll have to step up my game from now on. How about dinner at that new Italian place tonight? No aliens or Loverays involved, I promise." Jane squeezed his hand. "That sounds perfect. And Edward?" "Yes, dear. For what it's worth, I thought you were pretty irresistible even before the Venusian Love Ray." As they drove home, Edward couldn't help but feel grateful for his ordinary life and the woman who loved him, alien intervention or not. And if, in the years to come, he occasionally caught himself glancing up at the night sky and wondering about Venusian experiments, well, who could blame him? After all, it's not every day that a middle-aged, balding accountant becomes the most desirable man in town, even if it was just for a few chaotic, unforgettable hours.